Hello and welcome to the first demo of SAPUI5. As you know that SAPUI5 is not only an architectural framework, but it is also a UI framework. It uses jQuery UI and it uses jQuery mobile UI for developing its UI controls. And for developing SAP-based applications, UI5 is really the way to go. So in this particular demo, we are going to see how to navigate from one view to another. We are going to keep it really simple. And in the next demos, we are going to see how to use the router and how to use the controllers and how to pass data from one controller to another controller and all those things. So let's get started. I'm using the Luna version of Eclipse, and you can download Kepler version also. SAP has created libraries for both these versions. To install the library, you can get into Help and click on Install New Software. And here you can place this link, which is tools.hana.ondemand.com/Luna. If you're using Kepler, replace Luna with Kepler, and the last option that you get is SAP UI5 Toolkit. Install that. It's going to take some time, but it gets it done. So I am not going to install the plugin again. I already have installed it. So let's create a new project. We are going to create it by new other, and we're going to create one application project. We are going to name it as demo, and we are going to use this library, SAP UI Commons. I'll talk about this when we get into the application. By default, we want to create an initial view. We'll name it as page 1, and we want our view to be JavaScript. You are free to use any of the views, and I personally prefer HTML view because it's easier to code, and it gives me more benefit by using HTML. Uh, but using JavaScript view is much better in this scenario because the entire framework is JavaScript based. So you can get elements, pass data and stuff like that very quickly using the JavaScript view. And majority of the developers who work with SAP UI5 prefer to use JavaScript. So I'm to go ahead and I'm going to create this view. Click next and finish. All right. So now SAP, this plugin has already created our controller and the view. Uh, you should note the naming convention of the view. When you give it as page 1, it is going to create a view which is page1.view.js. So you don't create a view called page1.view. It's going to be page 1. And by default, it creates a controller whose naming convention is page1.controller.js gets appended to page 1. And we are not going to use the controller in this demo, so I'm just going to close it. We are going to use this index.html file, and let's read what it has. So this is the basic bootstrap of how your application gets triggered. Uh, the first script that you see is the basic library that it loads, and SAP UI code.js in turn will get more libraries. Uh, and then there is SAP UI libraries. We are going to use SAP UI Commons. Now, the UI libraries are placed inside this particular library. So if you talk about text box or input field or text area, everything gets derived from SAP UI Commons. And we are using the theme SAP Blue Crystal. There are other themes. We'll look into them in the next videos. So that's all about this first script. And now let's go ahead and create shell. Now, when I started learning UI5, it was real confusing for me where to use O shell, where to use shell, and when not to use shell. So shell is basically a part of a UI component which gives you a bunch of options by default. So it creates a container for you, and that container you can modify, you can remove elements from that container. So you don't have to work with a lot of CSS. So we'll look into that in more detail as and when we proceed in this video. So let's go ahead and delete this 2 lines. We don't need it at the moment. And we are going to create a shell. So the way to create is you represent it by var, which is a variable, and you give O shell. Uh, this you can name anything. You can name it as shell or anything you want, but I try to use O shell is equal to new, we don't need new, sap.ui.ux3. Now shell is a part of this particular library, so we are going to add that library into our other libraries, into other UI libraries. And now once you have that, now you can get shell out of it, and inside this we are going to pass an object. So always remember that when you pass an object, you pass it by curly braces, and when you are working with arrays, you pass a square bracket, right? So we are going to pass an object, so I've written curly braces, and the first key that we are going to pass is the app title. In this case, we are just going to write it as demo. Now remember, this is standard. You cannot write app title 1 or app title 2. This is going to be standard. And after we have created the shell, we need to place it inside one of the div. So div is basically a container, and inside this we are going to place the shell. So you can write o shell dot place at, and we can give content. Now you can give any ID here. Basically there is no restriction of keeping only content which SAP provides, but let's say we are going to use container here, but you need to place the container here as well. And if you want to see how the shell looks like, you can just run this application, run as web app preview, and this is how the shell looks like. I don't prefer using the Eclipse browser, but I prefer using the Mozilla browser. Uh, I have installed Firebug. It is an extension of Firebug which gives you access to a lot of stuff. You can access the DOM and you can see what all things are there. And there's a console where you can write commands here and you can test it right from the console. Uh, the other major thing about the console is when you click refresh, it is going to show what all libraries it has loaded for you. Uh, in JavaScript, it has loaded all these libraries. In CSS, it has loaded all this. So that's all about the shell. Now it already comes with a logout button, a search button, a comment button, and if you don't want it, we can remove it. So the way to remove that is we are going to write show logout button and we are going to make it false. And the next thing is the search tool. If we don't want show search tool, we are going to make it false. So this is going to remove both this logout button and the search tool, right? And now we need to create a menu, right, which will be placed here. So to create the menu in SAP portal, we relate a menu as work set, right? So here we are going to say work set items, and work set items is going to have an array, and inside this array we are going to write the work set items. So, and also there is one more point about the naming convention. Always remember that whenever you're writing the keys here about the object, it starts with a small alphabet and the second word starts with a capital alphabet. So if you see work set items, it starts with a small alphabet and the second item starts with a capital alphabet. And if you're deriving something from SAP UI UX3 or SAP UI Commons, then it is going to start with a capital alphabet. For example, we are deriving shell. So it doesn't start with a small alphabet, but it starts with a capital alphabet. So once you have the work set items, now we can write new sap.ui.ux3.navigation item. Now navigation item is a part of the UX3 and that's why we write it like this. And inside this we are going to write another object here, and this object we have to write it as key. In this case our key is page 1, and we have to write a text, and in this case it is going to be again page 1. You can write it anything. Let's write it as main page. And why we have written page 1? Because after we get the key, it's easier for us to call this page, right? So this is page 1, so that's the reason we have written here page 1. We'll look into this in more detail. And if you need to give an ID to this navigation item, so you can give the ID over here, and in our case we are just going to give it as page 1 ID, and we are going to create one more navigation item that is going to be new sap.ui.ux3 navigation item, and this is going to be page 2 ID, and we are going to pass an object whose key is going to be page 2 and whose text is going to be page 2. Now let's create this another view whose name should be page 2. So I get into demo, new, other, view. We are going to name it as page 2. It's a JavaScript view, and we click finish. So our page 2 view gets created, and let's add some content in our page. So we are just going to write var text is equal to new sap.ui.commons. We are going to create a text view, so it gets derived from commons. So our text view is going to have a text which is, this is page 1, and then we are going to return this o text, right? And we copy the same thing and we write it in our page 2 view, and in this case this is going to be page 2, and we return the o text. So our views are done. Now if you refresh this, so you see this is main page and this is my page 2, and I can navigate, but nothing's gonna happen at the moment, right? Now when I refresh this page, it says that the main is selected, but it doesn't show us the content of this page, which is page 1. For simplicity, I'll just name it as page 1 so that we don't get confused, right? So it doesn't show me the text which we have already written here. This is page 1. So to do that, we are going to tell this application that please select this page 1 as the default page. So the way to do that is you write another item here, which is going to be your content, and content is going to be an array. It is not an object, it is an array, and we pass here new sap.ui.view, and in this view we are going to pass an ID. The ID is going to be page 1. Let's keep that as ID. Always remember that you cannot give same IDs here. So page 1, page 2, and this ID, they need to be different. We can say that this is the view 1 ID, and after that we are going to say what is the view name that we want to load. So our view name is going to be demo.page1, and also we have to say what type of view is that. So in this case it is a JavaScript view, so you write sap.ui.core.mvc.viewType, and it is a JS view. So now we have set the default view, which is going to be our page 1. Now if we go ahead and refresh this, by default it says this is page 1, and when we navigate to page 2, it is not doing anything at the moment. So the way to trigger page 2 is we are going to write another item here, which is what happens when we select this. So when we select this workset item, you can write workset item selected, and this is going to be a function, and give a comma. So once we click on this, we want to tell the application that load the page 2. So to do that, we give an event here. By default, it's going to set this event, and this event is going to tell us which button did we click, which menu item did we click. So the first thing is we are going to say which one did we select. Var selected is equal to e dot get parameter, and we want to know the key of this, right? And after we get the key, now we need to know which is the view name. So that's pretty simple. We write o view. This can be anything. You can just write view as well, no problem with that. And here we write sap.ui.getCore.byId, and by ID is selected. This is what we want. Now we can use console.log to check what is it selecting. Right now, what console.log does is, now this function is not a part of SAPUI5, it is a part of the browser, and the browser can read this and it's gonna print it into our console, which is here. So now when I refresh this page, and I'm going to clear that, and when I click on page 2, it gives me page 2. So now I know I need to load page 2 .view.js, right? So we already have the view. We can delete this. So we can write okay, one more thing which is important. Now when you load the application for the first time, this application has no clue what is there inside this, which view is it. It doesn't load both these views automatically, right? So when you click on this, now it loads page 2. But if you go back to page 1 and again you click page 2, the content is already there, because the first time when you clicked on page 2, the application got to know what is page 2, what is its content. So it is not going to create the views again and again, right? So we are going to say if view is equal to undefined. So this is the first time the view is going to be undefined, and then we are going to load our view, so which is new sap.ui.view, and inside this we are going to pass the object, which is id is going to be selected, and our view name. So when we say selected, we are meaning that we are getting the value page 1. So in this case, our view name is going to be demo.page1. So it is missing demo dot, and then we write selected. So when we click on this, this is going to be demo.page1, right? And then we mention the type of this view, which we have already written here. Okay, so now when this view, when it is undefined, it is going to create that view for us, and after this we are going to tell the shell that add this content, which is nothing but view, right? So I'm going to write a small console.log new view rendering, and we are going to write else console.log old view. Okay, now you will understand what this means when view is equal to undefined. So let's go ahead, refresh our app. Okay, now when we are going to click on page 2, it is a new view. So now the application has the idea, what is this view, right? And it says new view rendering. And when we click on page 1, it is also a new view. So the app came to know that, okay, this is page 1. Now when we click back again on page 2, the application already has the idea that this is already a view which the application knows. So it is going to say old view rendering. So when I click on view 2, it says old view, and when I click on page 1, it again says old view, right? So that's the reason we write here, if the view is undefined, we create, or else we go ahead with the view which the application knows. Now the problem here is when we refresh it, by default it is going to be page 1, but when we click on this, it is appending the content of page 2 into the page 1. So we are going to remove this content from here. So the way to do that is, when we select item, we are going to say that this dot, now this is nothing but we are referencing the shell, right? So this dot remove all content. Now if we go back and refresh this, and when we click on page 2, it gets us page 2. When we click on page 1, it gets us page 1. Right, so that's all about how to navigate from one page to another page. In my next video, I'm going to show you how to use routers. Why do we need routers? Basically, now let's say that I want to forward this link to one of my friend. So I copy this URL and I send it back to my friend, and when he opens it, he doesn't see page 2, he sees page 1. So we want our URL to be dynamic. So when I click on page 2, our URL should change. And the way to change the URL is by using hash, because that way the page doesn't get refreshed. So I can write anything, page 1, and you see the page doesn't get refreshed if I write page 2. So that's the way about how to handle routers. We'll look that into the next video. If you have not understood anything, please write a comment and I'll make sure to explain that in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.